Hey class, this is Mr. Schmidt. So we're talking about the recap of Monday, January 4th's discussion of pollution sources and air pollution. Okay, so let's come over to the first assignment, notes here. Um, this was our first class back from break, so I asked what happened on December 21st and happens December 21st, 22nd every year, in fact. And what you'll see from the link is that is the winter solstice. It's when in the northern hemisphere, the sun is the lowest in the sky because the northern part of the earth is pointed away from the sun. So it is very cold in the northern hemisphere and very warm in the southern hemisphere. Okay. Um, but that was not the topic of today's lesson. Today's lesson was all about air pollution. And we want to learn about air pollution comes from many sources, including point sources and non-point sources. Okay. And we'll know we have learned it when you're able to identify sources of pollution and describe the different types. Okay. So this first drawing gives us a nice visual image of how to incorporate all that. So we're going to have some mobile sources like cars, trucks, those types of things are on the move. Those happen to be point sources, by the way. Then we have things like factories, which are stationary, are also point sources. Um, then we have some other stationary ones that take up large areas, are not any single point. So these are areas, are non-point sources like farms and cities. And then we can have some other non-point source uh, pollutants, such as volcanoes or forest fires that might range from different places and pop up and disappear again. Okay, so we see there's these different categories and they all fall within the point source and non-point source categories of air pollution, which is these foreign particles in the air. Okay, so to go along with those pictures, there are four main types of air pollution sources. Mobile sources such as cars, buses, planes, trucks, trains, those types of things. Stationary sources, like I said, power plants, oil refineries, industrial facilities, and factories. Area sources such as agricultural farms, cities, and wood-burning fireplaces. Okay, and frankly, wood-burning fireplaces is underrated in terms of it produces a great deal of particulate matter and air pollution. All right, and then finally, natural sources such as wind-blown dust, wildfires, and volcanoes. Okay, we live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's easy to forget about wind-blown dust. But if you live in a desert, you're going to know that wind-blown dust is a huge problem for air pollution and can greatly affect the biome and the environment and the climate. Okay, so as we go forward, we're looking at the point source pollution. And this is what our assignment is going to be over, is the point source pollution, or what non-point. Okay, so point source pollutions, pollutants from a specific identifiable source, such as a tailpipe of a car, or a tank, or a pit, or a ditch, or a channel, or a body of water. Okay, so the bulk of the point source pollution comes from wastewater discharge or from power plants or large industrial plants. So notice here they're not just talking about air pollution, because it's very hard to talk about air pollution without also talking about water pollution. Okay, the water cycle clearly goes up into the clouds, pulls some of that stuff down, brings it back into the water stream. And if we inject anything into the water stream itself, it will also affect what's being taken up into the clouds. So because the air is so intertwined with the water cycle, we're going to see a lot of discussions crossing back and forth between pollution sources and air pollution and water pollution. Okay, so if we were to take the official government definition of a point source pollution, it is exactly what we're talking about. Identifiable source of pollution, which pollutants are discharged, such as a tailpipe, a ditch, a ship, or a factory smokestack. Okay, so these are all things that you can see, identify, measure, control, You could put a filter on it. You can do all sorts of things with these point source pollutants. Okay, so the state of Minnesota did a study of a few different types of pollution. Remember, we talked about there's air and there's water and there's different things that are going into the air. This one study looked specifically at point source pollution going into the air. Okay, and what did they find? The big categories were factories, agriculture, cars, and trucks. Okay, so that is a huge chunk. That's over 75% of all the pollutants. So those are what's really affecting Minnesota specifically, but this similar story could come to any state or any country, as the factories and agriculture play a huge part in what is being pushed into the air. And as we make choices around our personal vehicles and our personal transportation, we have a lot of control over this other part, but we have to make sure that our participation in the economy and in the politics identifies and holds accountable these other pieces as well. Okay, non-point solution, the pollutants from diffuse or widespread sources. All right, usually non-point source pollution is transported by stormwater. Like I said, we're talking water again, but it also could be said about air pollution. Okay, so if we're thinking about agriculture as a point source, we can also think about things like cows and how you can have a whole lot of cows all over the place and they can all be producing methane and putting that into the air as well as a non-point source pollution. Okay, so here we see that both we have some of this water pollution in surface runoff from non-point source pollutions to point source pollutions like coming from factories can both put into the water and be putting it into the air. Okay, so these are all sources of pollution here. Okay, so if we're looking at specific sources of non-point source pollution, okay, specific categories, we can talk about things like fertilizers, herbicides, and insecticides. Those are some of the biggest contributors to non-point source pollution. Also the oil and grease and toxic chemicals, okay? So anything coming out of your car like antifreeze, that would be a toxic chemical, okay? Sediment from improperly managed construction sites. So again, if you were building a house or a factory or a mall or something like that, and you're kicking up a lot of dust, you're going to be getting air pollution. And if you're not covering it when it rains, you're going to get some stream bank erosion as well from the management of your construction site. All right, and then salt and acid drainage from abandoned mines, bacteria and nutrients from livestock and pet waste, and faulty septic systems, and finally atmospheric decomposition and hydro modification. So remember, hydro means water, okay? So we can have air and water being generated in places that's not normally there, and it can affect the environment. Okay, again, we're getting this information from the EPA. Okay, so if we're trying to tie this all in with the water cycle, hopefully what we see is this nice clean water cycle so that when it hits the farms and it hits us and it hits our cars and it hits the neighborhood, we get nice, clean, pure rain. But if we are putting all sorts of contents into the sky, that is going to get picked up and moved and mixed with everything in the clouds and transported, and whatever goes up must come down, and that comes down in the form of acid rain or toxins or contaminants. We have all sorts of different problems. So early on, they used to say dilution. If we spread this out, it won't be a problem. That's true if you're the only factory in the world, but if every city and every state and every country have factories and they're all producing pollution, and they all have cars, and they all have farms, and they're all producing pollution, then we're going to have a buildup of all these different biological effects on the environment. Okay. So that kind of gave us a start here for our assignment. I wanted to end with this one because this is a funny little note to remind us about the upcoming exam. Okay. The final exam will only cover a few chapters, but here it says physics from creation to collapse. Okay. So that is all of time would be the physics exam. Okay. We're not studying physics, we're studying environmental science. So the good news is we're not going to study this, but we will be studying, the final exam will cover all the different chapters. And it will involve what's called a lab practical. I'll ask you essay questions around a lab, and you'll have to answer in paragraph format what's happening and basically do a lab as part of your final exam, okay, with me giving you the data. Okay, so let's finish this off by looking at the assignment here. So as you see, you're going to say whether each source of pollution is a non-point source or a point source. And this is actually one of those great assignments to do on the computer because you can just grab your digital highlighter and say erosion. Erosion's everywhere, so it's non-point source. Factories. Factories are in very specific places, so that is going to be a point source. And you keep going down, whether it can be spread out or whether it is in a very specific spot. Okay, and you're going to answer all those questions, and then you're going to write a very short list here. So with that, hopefully you have the information you need, or you have questions ready to come into Storm Time tomorrow, and I will see all of you soon.